What's up everybody? In today's video we're going to be talking more about the Canon Powershot V1 and whether or not it can take on Sony in the compact camera market. We've got more details and specs, we've got pricing, and we've got an estimated release date. So in recent videos I've been talking a lot about the fact that Canon kind of reversed course on the fact that it's going to get back into the compact camera market. It kind of let that market go, and a number of other manufacturers have been able to kind of jump in and fill that space. Not to mention the fact that older Canon compact cameras like the GX7 have actually been very popular, and Sony has had their vlogging cameras, right, the ZV series, that has been extremely popular and really has been the #1 competition for Canon in the smaller camera space. So the news that we have is that Canon's jumping back into that market, and now we have more specs about the Powershot V1. Now I've done a couple of videos on the information that we've had thus far on the Powershot camera, and I got some really great questions in some of my previous videos about the lens configuration and whether or not this would have a better zoom range. And so while we talk about this camera and the specs, know that we are both expecting this camera and a number of other potential cameras in this V line within 2025. Maybe not all at the same time, but coming soon, including what we expect to see as a very large zoom version of this compact camera. And that's because in addition to this camera coming out, we're expecting to see Canon discontinue the GX7 and the SX740. And the SX740 is an extremely wide 40 by optical zoom range camera. So while we don't have specific details on the successor to that camera, we do expect it to be coming at some point in the next 12 months as a part of this reintroduction of Canon compact cameras. But that's enough about where Canon is in the market. Let's talk about this camera specifically. Now, details on this camera have been coming from a couple of different sources, including some posters on Weibo, as well as the usual suspects, Canon Rumors and CanonWatch.com, and I will link them below. So it sounds like the specs on this sensor are starting to really solidify with a 24 megapixel CMOS sensor that is going to be made by Canon. Now, whether or not this is going to be a stacked sensor might actually be really important when you compare it to its #1 competitor, which is going to be the Sony ZV-1 II. But we'll talk about that camera in just a minute. The next bit of information that we have, which I detailed in my previous video about this camera and a series of other cameras that Canon is going to be potentially releasing this year, which I will link right up here, go and check that out, is that it is going to be a 3x2 sensor, but in the micro four thirds size. So it will be a 1.4 inch sensor with a 3x2 aspect ratio. Additionally, and this was rumored, but now seems pretty much confirmed, we're gonna be getting the dual pixel autofocus 2, as well as the Digic X processor. Some may remember that when the Digic X was put into cameras like the R5 and the R6, we did have overheating issues, but then when the R6 Mark II came out, not only were the overheating issues significantly improved, but also the battery life was extended. And I believe that that is directly related to a process improvement on that processor. We may still be seeing additional evolutions of that chip to be able to go into a much smaller camera like this as they improve the process node capabilities for this same chip. Also looking like it's going to be getting the multi-function hot shoe that Canon has been putting on their cameras for the last couple of years. Now that gets you access to accessories such as their shotgun mic, which may be included in a creator's bundle that would be introduced alongside this camera. They may have additional accessories that would also be released with this camera for vloggers and content creators that would utilize the multifunction hot shoe. And while this is a 1.4 inch sensor, micro four thirds, it's going to be a 3x2 aspect ratio, we are going to be seeing a 16 to 50 or 16 to 55 millimeter lens. And I got a question on a previous video in a comment that asked, is that 35 equivalent? I always like to use 35 equivalent measurements. So this will be a very wide 16 millimeter equivalent and go all the way out to 50 millimeters, which should be great for things like portraits and videos where you really want to compress the background, which is also helped by the fact that this will have a 1.8 to 2.8 aperture lens. So starting at 16 millimeters up to maybe 20, 24 millimeters, you'd be at 1.8, and then beyond, you'd probably be at 2.8. We're not really sure where the division would be. Now we knew that this would have an articulating screen. No news as to whether or not this will have that Sony style articulating screen where not only can it flip out, but it can also flip down under the body, which I think would be really helpful. Because traditionally, if you're gonna be shooting vertically and you want to have your screen up like this, that's really just kind of a lot. It would actually be really nice if the screen was here, or like the Sony, if it popped up on the top, which you can do when you have additional articulation options. Also seeing that it will shoot in 4K with a very slight crop as a result of that 3:2 aspect ratio. And I'll put a diagram up on the screen where I think that 4K will land if it is a traditional 16:9 4K on this 3:2 sensor that's going to be 24 megapixels. One detail that seems unconfirmed, though again, if this camera is going to be competing with the ZV-1 II, it should be able to shoot at 4K 60 and at least HD 120. One bit of feature news that we're hearing is that it would potentially have some sort of streaming capability, which I'm going to assume is just going to be similar to other Canon cameras, although it would be very nice if you could pull a 4K signal off of this via USB without the need for their monthly subscription, which right now you need just to get 1080. The next feature that we're hearing will be included in this release is your standard shooting modes, RAW, Canon RAW, and dual pixel RAW. Now, dual pixel RAW came out with the Canon R5, and it allows you to utilize both photo sites. Canon cameras utilize dual photo sites to be able to enable dual pixel autofocus too. And it kind of uses those photo sites in the same way that dual pixel autofocus does. They're microns off from each other, and as a result, you get a slightly different image, and that's how it's able to measure the focusing for those two photo sites. And so basically, it allows you to take an image with both of them and then kind of shift the focus between the two. It's a micro adjustment. It's not huge. If you're shooting in extremely shallow depth of field situations, you could potentially shift focus to make an eye more in focus if the other one had been where your focus point hit, or the tip of your nose or something like that. That's not super uncommon in portrait photography, but I'm not sure where with this camera in particular that would be an advantage. I don't use it on my R5 ever. I have to use the Canon software for it, and honestly, I've never found the need, so I'm not sure why this would be a feature that they felt was something that they would need to include in this compact camera. Video recording in HEVC 265, not a surprise there. Video shooting will have log capability in C-Log 3, as well as Canon's HDR-PQ mode, and they will be releasing a full line of accessories to go with this camera. Again, very similar to what Sony has done with the ZV-1, including what we expect to be a creator bundle. But now let's talk about what is this camera's #1 competition. And I squarely think that it is the Sony ZV-1 II. And I think that that camera lines up really well with what we're hearing about this Canon camera, because it is also a smaller sensor. It has a fixed non-interchangeable lens. Pricing is very similar to what we're hearing on the Canon Powershot V1, and it's marketed towards creatives that need a small form factor package. Now, that camera is a year and a half old, so there is still the potential for Sony to come out with a Mark III and just leapfrog over Canon if we see the Canon version this spring. But where the Canon actually can potentially be an improvement over the Sony is that it will be coming with that larger sensor. It's a 1.4 inch versus a 1 inch on the Sony. It is a 24 megapixel sensor as well. And while it does have a slightly wider, largest focal length at 16 millimeters versus 18 on the Sony, but I think the real win is that at the longer focal length at 50 millimeters, you can actually get 2.8 out of the Canon, whereas the Sony is f4. It can record 4K, but only up to 30 frames per second, and HD at 120. Being able to implement 4K 60 on this camera for Canon would be a win. It also supports Sony Log 3, but one thing that Sony did is they tweaked their autofocus algorithm just a little bit to accommodate influencers and content creators that might need to put something in front of the screen to be able to focus on it quickly. Now, I think dual pixel autofocus 2 does that pretty well, but I'm curious if that's going to be something that we'll see specifically marketed for folks who would potentially buy this camera. Now, there are other compact cameras obviously in this space, but they're a little bit less expensive, and the specs that we're seeing and the pricing that we're seeing tells me that this is the direction that Canon is really kind of aiming. Because the word that we're hearing is that this camera is going to be coming out at $899. But right now that's about the price that we're seeing the ZV-1 II, so I wouldn't be shocked if that's what we see it as, and then additional creator bundles available. For example, Sony has their handheld kind of control handle for the ZV series, as well as their microphone for their multimedia hot shoe. The expectations we would see pretty much the same kind of thing, maybe also lighting, something like that from Canon. The thing that interests me the most about this camera is the fact that it is Canon responding to market pressure pretty quickly and potentially developing an entirely new sensor for this product. So I'm very curious to see how a Canon-made sensor that's kind of an unorthodox size, how it does in a camera like this. So those are the details that we have on the Canon Powershot V1. I'm very curious to hear if folks who traditionally watch my videos are interested in a camera like this. If you're looking for small run and gun setup content creation, I can think of a couple of different people that I know personally where this would have been a great camera last year. Because if you're a content creator who does lives, who does quick setups and vlogging type stuff, as well as take great pictures, March release for this camera, if not sooner. So coming very soon at that $899 price. As always, don't forget about my Instagram giveaway. I am giving away gear. All you have to do is go over to my Instagram page, follow me there, like my photos, videos, and share some stuff. Come back here to this video or this short where I go into more detail about why and how I'm doing that Instagram giveaway, and go ahead and put a comment there that you did all the stuff that I'm asking, and you will be entered to win free gear from my vault of all the equipment that I review as I keep getting stuff sent to me. Additionally, I've got memberships open on the channel. That's a great way to support the channel and to help me to keep creating this kind of content. Perks for memberships include live chats, customized emoji, priority responses on comments, early access to videos, as well as resources that I'm going to be releasing that I've created myself, things like Lightroom presets, LUTs, and other graphics and templates that I've created as a photographer and a videographer and content creator here on YouTube. Another way that you can help support the channel is to click on my gear list down below. I've got a gear list for everything that I take out in the field, everything that I use as a portrait photographer, all the gear that I have here in the studio, and my essentials guide for 2025 to get started as a photographer. But a free and easy way to support the channel is to hit subscribe. And if you thought that this video was interesting, go ahead and hit the like button. If you're interested in seeing videos like this, go ahead and hit the bell. Of course, if you become a member, you can get those videos right away. But that's it for me today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.